I'm Corin Hall. I'm an author and I've been writing about the Romanovs for nearly 30 years, in fact more than 30 years. I got interested in Empress Marie Fyodorovna of Russia. And the reason I got interested in her was because I've always been interested in history, ever since I was a child, and I've always been interested in Russia, partly because I studied classical ballet also as a child, which when I was little was very Soviet influenced. But the other reason that got me interested was when I found out my great-grandmother was born in St. Petersburg. She was English, her father was a school teacher, and in 1859 he went out to St. Petersburg to teach in a British and American school in Alexandrovskoye near St. Petersburg. And he had 12 children, and 6 of them were born in Russia, and the other 6 were born back in England. And my great-grandmother, Alice Woodcock, was one of the ones born in St. Petersburg. Now, she only lived there for 3 or 4 years because the family came home. But the story fired my imagination and it got me interested in Russia. So I started reading books about Russia. And then somebody said to me one day, "You've got all this knowledge, why don't you write a book?" And I thought, don't be silly, I'm not clever enough to write a book. But then I thought, well, it would be fun to research somebody just for something to do, to fill in the evenings. And then I thought, who? And I noticed that Nicholas II's mother, Marie Fyodorovna, had hardly ever been done, at least not in England. There was one biography which was partly fiction, one biography that wasn't full because it didn't go right up until her death, and there was very little else. Now this was in 1981. Russia was still communist. There was no way I was going to be able to get to Russia. But the Empress was born Danish, Princess Dagmar of Denmark. And so as the years went on, I started investigating the Danish sources, and I learnt to read Danish so that I could do that. And it was like a jigsaw puzzle because there was no internet, there were no books, there was no information coming out of Russia. And it was like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, getting all the pieces and just finding where they fitted in. And eventually I got some sort of story of the Empress Marie's life. And that was published in 1999 under the title of Little Mother of Russia. It's still selling and it's still the definitive biography of her in English. There is still no other proper full biography of her in English.
This year, 2019, we are observing the 100th anniversary of the Dowager Empress Marie Fedorovna's departure from Russia and Crimea. What are your thoughts?
The exodus from Russia in 1919 would have been very sad for her. After all, she'd spent 50 years of her life in Russia. She'd brought up her children there. 2 of her sons had died before her. Her husband had died. She had 2 sons, Nicholas and Michael. She didn't know whether they were alive or dead, or if they needed her help. And having to abandon her homeland, or an adopted homeland, she thought was a betrayal. And she felt like she was betraying the Russian people and betraying the dynasty. I think it was terribly sad. She sent a telegram to her sister in England, Queen Alexandra, and said she was heartbroken. And I think that really sums up the whole situation. And when you see the pictures of her standing on the deck, actually sailing out from Yalta, watching the coastline until she couldn't see it any longer. In fact, I did that journey the opposite way. We actually came into Yalta by boat from the sea. So I saw it coming in, and I was standing there thinking, this is what she saw as she left. And I could see all the palaces along the shoreline. And I thought how heartbreaking it must have been for her to be able to see Levadia and all the palaces as she sailed out and know that that was it, that they had to leave and that they would be leaving forever. Because although a lot of them hoped they would be able to return and live their lives as before, we know it didn't happen. Terribly sad.
Some of us have enjoyed your marvelous biography of the Empress Marie Fedorovna, Little Mother of Russia, in English. I wonder why it hasn't yet been translated into Russian.
I wish they would translate it into Russian, in fact. I think one of the reasons is because it's quite a thick book, which means it would be expensive to translate. In fact, I was hoping to get it translated into Danish, and I actually had a meeting with a publisher some years ago, and they actually said, well, the Danish market is so small, the people who could be interested in it would read it in English, and it's too expensive to translate. And I think that's the reason it's only available in English. And I wish people would translate it into other languages, because as I said, it's still the definitive biography of her. What came across to me when I was researching her, which I did 18 years of research on her before I wrote this book, 18 years. And I felt like I really knew her. But what really came across was that she was fun. She loved being the Empress. She loved all the things associated with being the Empress. She loved dancing. She loved parties. She loved the clothes, the jewels. She loved the social occasions. She would dance, and her husband, Alexander III, would have to turn off the lights and stop the orchestra and send the orchestra home before the ball would stop, because she would have carried on all night. She absolutely loved anything like that. And I think the Russians warmed to her because she was so much fun. She was an outgoing personality, but she was also very caring. She headed all the charitable institutions associated with the Empress, and she cared about the people as well. And I think it's those two things that somehow met in the middle, made her a whole person. And I think the Russians really warmed to this Danish princess who had suddenly come among them.
An American ambassador's wife once wrote in her letters that the Empress Marie Fedorovna was the same for the Russian people as the sun to the earth. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I think that's a reasonable comparison, that she was the same to the Russians as the sun is to the earth, because everything shone around her. Yeah, I think that's a fair description. The only ambassador's wife I can think of is Mary Waddington, who wrote a lot of letters home about, she was at the coronation of Marie Fedorovna and Alexander III. She wrote a lot of very interesting letters describing the coronation and the festivities. Maybe that's who you mean, but yes, I would think that's a very good comparison.
What do you think about the union of Marie Fedorovna and Alexander III?
As regards Alexander III and Marie Fedorovna, I think it was an arranged marriage, but somehow it worked, because neither wanted to marry the other. She had been in love with his elder brother Nicholas, who she called Nixa, who had died tragically of meningitis before they had been engaged for very long. Alexander III had wanted to renounce his rights and marry a maid of honour. So he wasn't in love with Princess Dalmar. The marriage was arranged because Alexander II didn't want to lose the Danish marriage. So really, the next son had to step up and marry the widowed bride-to-be. And somehow it worked, because somehow they fell in love. They found common ground, even if at first it was the mourning for this dead Nixa. Somehow that brought them together, and the marriage worked, despite the fact they were two completely different people. And she smoothed out the rough edges in Alexander. He wasn't educated to be emperor, he hadn't expected to be emperor, and she managed to smooth out all the rough edges of his character, and she made him what he was, I think. I really believe that she made him what he was. They say that behind every successful man is a woman, and I think in this case it was really true, and it was her.
You have been researching and writing your book Little Mother of Russia for 18 years, correct? What inspired you?
I read a book by Theo Aronson called A Family of Kings, which was about the family of King Christian IX of Denmark. And of course, Dalmar was one of the daughters. And it was just her fun personality, and the fact that nothing had been written about her before. It was his book that inspired me to start researching her. And the more I found out about her, the more I liked her. And I grew to like her so much that I felt that I knew her. And I've got so much information about her at home, it's not true. But I think it was really her fun personality at first that really drew me into her. And of course, the strange thing was, I feel that she's up there, and she was guiding me. And I tell you why. Because after that book was published, right at the end of the book, I said that her greatest wish was to be buried in St. Petersburg alongside her husband. Well, when she died in 1928, that was of course impossible, because Russia was communist. She was buried in Denmark. A few years after the book was published, the head of the Romanov family at the time, Prince Nicholas, wrote to me And he said, "Where did you get the information about the Empress wanting to be reburied?" So I said, "I got it from the church warden at Rosskilde Cathedral. I got permission from the Queen of Denmark to visit Dagmar's tomb, and the church warden showed us around. And his father had known the Empress Marie, and he had been told by her that she wanted to be buried in Russia when the time was right. He then told his son, and it was the son who told me. So I gave this information to Prince Nicholas, and he went away, and I believe he spoke to the Queen of Denmark, and I believe she spoke to President Putin, and they had some negotiations. And in 2006, the Empress's wish was carried out, and she was reburied in Russia. And my husband and I were invited to the ceremony in Denmark when they brought the coffin up from the crypt, and they had a big service in Roskilde Cathedral, and then they took her all through Copenhagen, put her on a boat. They played the same song as the boat sailed off as they played when she left Russia. It's called "In Denmark I Was Born, There I Belong." And then we were invited to the ceremonies in Russia by the Russian government. So I saw her go through. I don't think many authors can say that they've written a book about someone who died that long ago and then attended their funeral.
Do you believe monarchy can be restored in Russia one day?
I think it's unlikely that monarchy will be restored in Russia, but stranger things have happened. I mean, no one thought that the Spanish monarchy will be restored, but it was, and it's happened in other countries. I think it's unlikely, but I wouldn't say it's impossible at some future time.
Based on the diaries, which were the happiest moments in the life of Alexander III and Marie Fedorovna?
I think probably the happiest moment in their marriage was the births of their children, because they were both very family orientated. Alexander III comes over as a man who is very, very family orientated, and I think probably their happiest time was when they had the young children, before he came to the throne, before they had all the tensions of worry about terrorist movements, assassination attempts and things like that. I think their happiest time was the birth of their children and bringing up a young family.
Recently, in Yalta, monuments of Alexander III were unveiled. We hope to see one day a monument to the Empress Marie Fedorovna as well in Russia and Crimea. Are there any monuments of her in England or Denmark?
There are memorials in Denmark. There is one by the Danish church in Bredgade, which is a bust of her in Copenhagen. I'm sure there are other memorials. She's very big in Denmark. They call her Kejserinde Dagmar, Dagmar being the Danish name of her. And she is very big in Denmark. And they have a lot of big exhibitions they've had of her. So yes, she would have memorials in Denmark. I would like to see one in Russia, though. I would like to see one in Crimea, for instance, along with Alexander III, because they had some happy times staying at Livadia in the Marly Palace. So yes, I think it would be nice if they put a monument up there as well to her.
We would like to invite you to Crimea.
I have been there, actually. We went to Yalta, I think it was 1999. We went down to the Crimea, and we went to all the palaces except Aitador, which at that time wasn't possible. And of course afterwards I wrote the biography of her daughter Grand Duchess Xenia, and of course Aitador was her home, so I would like to have seen Aitador, and that is the one I haven't seen. But yes, I would like to go again. That would be lovely.
You've written a series of biographies, Maria Fedorovna, Xenia, and recently Olga, the barefoot Romanov. Are they historically connected?
After I did Marie Fedorovna, I was thinking, what shall I do next? And a friend emailed me and said that John van der Kiest, who is another famous British writer, was doing a book on Grand Duchess Xenia, and it would be a good idea if we cooperated and did it together, and we did. So we wrote the biography of Xenia, and in fact I was researching at the Orthodox Church just up the road here for her. And we did that, and it was just people who interested me at the time. And after doing Xenia, I did what I always wanted to do, which was Matilda Jasinska. She's always fascinated me because she was a dancer, and I studied ballet from an early age. I've got the medals, certificates, qualifications, everything. And this Russian ballerina who was the mistress of the Tsarevich has always fascinated me. So I did her biography. And then, of course, I did a book on the unpronounceable name of Empress Marie's holiday home in Denmark, which is something like Veal or something like that, unpronounceable to English readers. But I did a book because a friend of mine had some photographs of the place, which were taken, we think, by a member of Queen Alexandra's staff, Queen Alexandra being Empress Marie's sister. She wanted the photos published, so we used her photos, my text, and it was done in English and Danish, with the help of a Danish friend of mine. So I did that. And then, as you say, I did helped Princess Olga Romanov with her memoirs, stayed down with her for a few days at a time with the dictaphone, putting it all together. And then I did To Free the Romanovs, which is the story of what happened between 1917 and 1919 to all the members of the family, not just Nicholas II, but everybody, how they escaped, who helped them, particularly their European relatives, who didn't help them in particular, and how they got out or what fate they suffered. And that was a very interesting project. And at the moment, I have just sent into the publisher a book called Queen Victoria and the Romanovs, 60 Years of Mutual Distrust, which will chronicle the relationship between Queen Victoria and the Romanovs between the beginning of her reign in 1837 and her death in 1901. And of course she met all the Russian Tsars, many of the Russian Grand Dukes and Duchesses and their relatives, and it's quite an interesting project because her feelings seesawed between love and hate, trust and mistrust the whole time, and it's a very, very interesting project. So I'm hoping that will be out either later this year or early next year.
How many books have you written?
Well, you see, there's some I've written outright, there's some I've collaborated on. There's a publisher in America who does a lot of picture books, and he did books like the Grand Dukes, the other Grand Dukes, the Grand Duchesses, and I've done chapters for those. I've done a couple of picture books for him, one on the Romanovs, one on something else, one on the Danish royal family. And then there's the books I've written outright myself, Little Mother, Xenia, Szczynska, Veal, Barefoot Romanov, Free the Romanovs, 7 or 8 myself. Yeah, so quite a few.
I hope we will see them in Russian.
I would like some of them to be in Russian language, particularly, as I said, Marie Feodorovna, and particularly Szczynska, because there's a lot of myths about her which are not true. A lot of things have been said about her, and I've tried to dispel some of those, particularly the one that says she had a child by Nicholas. She did not. And so it would be nice if some of those were translated into Russian. So, but Marie Feodorovna is like my baby, really. That's what got me going, and that's the one I would really, really, really like to see translated into Russian or another language.
Imagine that you are invited for a dinner with 3 Russian imperial people. Who would they be?
Marie Feodorovna, Marie Pavlovna the Elder. It was the Tsar's aunt. She's an interesting character. I would love to speak to her. She doesn't really count as imperial if I say Szczynska, does it? Although she did marry into the imperial family in the end. But yes, I would have liked her. Actually, many years ago, I wanted to do a book on Marie Pavlovna the Elder because I thought she would be interesting to research. But the problem is I don't know any German. So it would be back to starting like when I had to learn Danish. I'd have to start again and learn German to do it because she was German born. But I don't think that's going to happen somehow now.
According to some authors, Empress Marie Feodorovna treated her daughters, Ksenia and Olga, differently. Do you agree?
I don't think she was as close to Olga. I think she was probably closer to Xenia as the elder daughter. Xenia was more like her. She also liked the parties and the clothes and all that sort of thing, whereas Olga was more like her father. She was very much like Alexander III, no protocol. She liked the simple life. And of course, after the revolution, when she moved to Denmark, that's exactly the kind of life she lived. She used to walk around the little town of Ballerup in Denmark and do her own shopping. And everybody knew her, everybody spoke to her. And she was quite happy like that. She didn't want all the trappings and the lady in waiting and all that sort of thing. So I think their personalities were rather different. So I think that was more the reason, that it wasn't that the Empress disliked her, but I think their personalities were so different that they didn't really find a common ground, and that she had more common ground with Xenia.
Do you know how the Empress Maria Alexandrovna, wife of Alexander II, educated her children?
No, I don't. I know that they had English nurses and they all spoke fluent English. That I do know. I also know that the eldest son was better educated than the rest of them. I know that particularly the younger two sons, Sergei and Paul, had a very strong religious faith, and that the Empress Maria Alexandrovna also developed a very strong religious faith. She was another German princess, of course. I don't know much about how they educated the children.
What is your opinion about the last Russian Emperor, Nicholas II?
There's a lot of monuments suddenly gone up to Nicholas II. It's like the Russian people are suddenly rediscovering him. I don't know if that's true, but that's the impression I get, that they sort of neglected him. The first time I went to Russia was in 1991, literally 6 months before the fall of the communist regime. There was nothing to buy for Nicholas II. The only thing I could find was a car pennant. And the lady at the Peterhof gift shop was surprised that I wanted a pennant with Nicholas II on it. It's hanging in my study still. And that was the only thing. Now when you go to Russia, you can't move for books on Nicholas II. And it feels to me like the Russians are just discovering who he was and what happened to him and what had been done in 1918. And I think perhaps with all these monuments going up, there's a certain section trying perhaps to make amends for what happened to that family, particularly the children. So sad.
If Nicholas II would have been given permission by King George V to enter England, do you think he would have lived on the Isle of Wight?
I don't think Nicholas would have left Russia. I don't think he would have left his country. I think his ideal scenario would have been to go down to the Crimea and live at Livadia as a private person with his wife and children. Now, of course, that was never going to happen. I don't think he wanted to leave Russia. I think he was quite happy as long as he was in Russia. But of course, things took a rather difficult turn. And of course, there is the question of George V and the fact that he didn't really want any of the Grand Dukes. So there's one thing I found when I was researching to free the Romanovs was that George V and the government did not want any of the Russian Grand Dukes in England. And there was a memo that somebody wrote and actually said that we don't want the Russian Grand Dukes here. And I think they were afraid that the Russian Grand Dukes were going to overrun the country. And maybe they were afraid they were going to have to pay for them. Who knows? Maybe that was it. You know, who's going to pay for all these people when they arrive here? Because all the wealth of the Romanovs and the stories of the fabulous lifestyle they all led and everything. Perhaps the king was afraid he was going to have to foot the bill. Who knows? But I really don't think Nicholas wanted to leave Russia. When John van der Kiste and I were writing Once a Grand Duchess, we had a lot of help because at that time several of Grand Duchess Xenia's grandsons were still living, and they were a great help. There was Prince Alexander, who mainly lived abroad, but he used to come over to England, and when he came over he'd give me a call and we'd meet for tea, and he'd tell me his recollections of his grandmother. And when we were doing the photos for the book, I took them all up to a place in Sloane Square, sat down with him over a cup of tea, and he identified all the pictures for us. And there was another grandson, Michel, who I used to go and see in Paris. And my husband and I used to go over frequently and visit Michel. And he, oh, don't worry about the title. I'm just Michel. Don't call me Prince or anything like that. And he was lovely, and he'd take us out to lunch, and we'd sit there drinking wine all afternoon. And he'd tell me his recollections of the family and all this sort of thing. And then there was Prince Andrew, who's still alive in America. We had dinner with him one night in America, and he told me the stories of when they lived at Frogmore Cottage and just after the revolution, that sort of thing. So I had quite a lot of help. I knew quite a lot of the descendants. I've been in touch with several others by email over the years. I think a lot of them know of me, even if they don't actually know me.
What are your thoughts about Empress Marie Fedorovna and her daughter-in-law Alexandra?
A lot has been written about the relationship of Marie Fedorovna and her daughter-in-law Alexandra, and about this clash with them. And again, I think it's the same as the Empress and Olga. It was a clash of personalities, two completely different people who didn't get on because they couldn't see each other's point of view. I don't think the Empress set out to dislike her daughter-in-law. I don't think she set out to, as we would say, spike her guns by not handing over the crown jewels and all this sort of thing. But I think Alexandra comes over to me as a prude. She was very English in her ways. I know this sounds very strange from someone who is English, but she wasn't the fun-loving empress at home in society, at ease in society, that Marie Feodorovna was. And I think because of that, the Russians didn't warm to her, and Empress Marie couldn't warm to her either. And the more Alexandra shut herself away at Zarskoe Selo, in a little cosy little world with her husband and children, the less Marie Feodorovna wanted to know. And I think she felt that she was damaging the dynasty, especially when Rasputin started coming on the horizon. And I think she felt that the harm was being done, and it was being done by Alexandra. But I think it was two women, a clash of personalities, and they could not see each other's point of view.
What would you like to tell the Russian readers?
Read Little Mother of Russia. Get it translated into Russian and read it. You will enjoy it.